and welcome to another episode of Professional Book Girl. My name is Kayla and I read a ton of books so that I can recommend the best to you, and that is what we are doing today. Today is a very exciting episode. It is our monthly Listener's Choice episode. So what does that mean? Every single book you are going to hear me cover, even the opening topics, are all requested from you guys. You get to choose what you want to hear me talk about once a month, and that is what we're doing today. First up, a few announcements, a follow-up from last week's episode. I read The Second Divine Rivals and I loved it, gave it 4 stars. So it was a 4-star series. Just loved those books so much. Main announcement is book club is coming up. Our January book club pick is Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. I actually am going to start reading it the second I finish recording this episode. I'm so excited to start it. I planned on starting last night, but I sat down at 8 o'clock to watch Housewives and I fell asleep like for the whole night. So I did not get to start my book, but I will be starting the book club pick tonight. I cannot wait. That episode will be out on February 1st. It will be a separate book club episode where you'll hear everything I think and have to say about that book. And you guys can be a part of that episode. Send a voice memo or film yourself talking about it, all of your thoughts, and send it on over to professionalbookgirlpod@gmail.com to be a part of that episode. I'm so excited. I can't wait. I'll probably record it. I want to record it. All of my thoughts are fresh, and I'm not going to share any thoughts online. All of my thoughts on tomorrow will be saved for that episode. So I am very excited. It has been so exciting seeing you guys are picking up the book. It's also been so much fun. Family members of mine have been texting me that they're reading it. People my mom knows are like, oh, I got Kayla's book club pick. So excited that you guys are also excited about this. If you have not picked it up yet, you can do so on my bookshop.org page. This is basically just somewhere you can buy all the books I talk about on every episode, and I get a little bit of money if you buy through there. So it's bookshop.org/shop/professionalbookgirl. Please make sure you're following, subscribe, whatever you guys do on whatever podcast platform you're listening on, and follow us on social media at Professional Book Girl. Follow me at KRedWhat, and those are all of the announcements. Let's get into this listener's choice episode. I feel like a WWE ring guy talking like that, and WWE has been very top of mind because I saw the Iron Claw and I was never the same again. So fun fact, literally nobody knows about me, but back in the day, me and my siblings were so into WWE. It was the three of us would sit down together and watch Monday Night Raw and SmackDown, and we were so into it. We went to SmackDown once and it was so fun, and obviously I grew out of that phase of my life. But the Iron Claw is about the Von Erich family, a real life wrestling family in the 80s. It's the Zac Efron movie, and it is so good. I cried so much. It is deeply upsetting. Go see it when you're in a good mental health place, but I loved it so much. That was not a listener requested topic, but that is something I'm obsessed with this week. But now for topics you guys requested. I went through them all and I just pulled 3 to talk about. I'm not planning on going super in depth, but you never know with me. Once I get in front of the mic and start talking, I can't shut up, and that's why I have a podcast. So the first one is a request for my favorite restaurants in New York City. If you are not aware and you're listening, I do live in New York City. I was thinking about this all day before I sat down to record. So I obviously have spots that I go to multiple times. You always have a roster in the back of your head for if someone's like, hey, let's go out to dinner tonight. Actually tonight, once I'm finished recording, I'm going out to dinner with my friend, and we pulled a restaurant that we've been to before because it was last minute plans. We know that it'll be good food and that we like it there. But honestly, most of the time when I go out to eat, I am trying new restaurants, and that is something that is so cool about living where I live. There are so many amazing restaurants. My neighborhood specifically, I live on the Lower East Side. There are just so many spots when you're walking around, you could just walk and stumble into the best restaurant you've ever been to. So for also in New York, going out to eat is an activity. And my whole life, I've always loved going out to dinner. And that is how we hang out. So my friends and I don't ever really go to each other's apartments. It really is let's meet up for dinner. So usually I'm always trying new spots that way. I go to multiple new restaurants a month. I do have my roster though in the back of my mind. So I love Little Frankie's. That's really great Italian food. I love La Contenta for Mexican. That's my favorite Mexican in the city. I also love Essex Tequila, which I've actually never been there. And I'll talk about my takeout spots after, but on the Mexican theme, I love that place. It's like Chipotle, but real food. I love where else do I go? I love Westville, which is like maybe some people would think was cringy, but like it always hits, so I love it there. I also really love The Smith, which is another one that people like make fun of and whatever, but it always tastes good. So I love it there. I love, where else do I love? I'm like, see, I don't even know the names really of all of the restaurants. Sauce is really good. Which, fun fact, Paige from Summer House used to date the guy who owned Sauce. And one time I was sitting there eating outside with my mom and my sister, and Niall from One Direction walked by us, and it was like a majorly unwell moment. So always love it there. For takeout spots, I always order my sushi from Soho Sushi. I've only been there once. I actually walked by my Chinese food place the other day, and it's like you shouldn't ever see it, and it looked okay, and they had like an A rating outside, so I was glad. But um I always order from Soho Sushi. I order from Essex to Kira a lot. Yeah, I'm trying to think. Where do I go? I love Pasta Eater in Union Square. There's another good Mexican spot in Union Square that I can't remember the name of. I love Isabel's, that's over there. Ito Sushi, also in Union Square. I used to work in Union Square, so I know a lot of the restaurants over there just because of like convenience. But yeah, those are all the ones that I can think of. The next topic is, what are my thoughts on the Golden Globes? And I feel like this might surprise people, but I actually don't watch award shows anymore. So back in the day when I was in high school specifically, it was like Oscars are my Super Bowl. I was so into it, but I feel like they've just gotten so boring. And now with the way social media has evolved, I feel like you can just watch the award show on social media and you don't lose hours of your life to it. So usually like on an award show night, I'll sit and read. And then every half hour or so, I'll go on my phone, go on Twitter, go on TikTok, go on Instagram, see what's going on, what is happening at the award show. Like I used to be obsessed with the like Hollywood red carpet. I used to watch Fashion Police obsessively, and like E didn't even have a red carpet like presence on. They didn't have like a red carpet show for the Golden Globes, which is just so devastating the way that they have let that completely like slide by and die, because that was like their bread and butter and why most people, including myself, were tuning into them. So I don't watch the award shows. I am debating watching the Oscars this year for the first time, probably in like a long time. I can't even remember the last Oscars that I watched, because I saw so many of the movies that I'm assuming will be nominated for Oscars. So I'm interested in that. But yeah, I don't watch award shows. I obviously saw all of the Taylor, Selena, what were they talking about drama, Timothy and Kylie. I was so happy to see Cillian Murphy and Robert Downey Jr. win for Oppenheimer, specifically Cillian, because I've just loved him forever, especially from Peaky Blinders. So I'm hoping he'll get the Oscar. But yeah, I'm not really an award show girly anymore. The final topic is maybe a controversial one. It is a bookish one, and it is Colleen Hoover. And the person that wrote in said, I don't understand the hype because this person didn't like her books. So I have so many thoughts on Colleen Hoover. And I just first want to say, if you read and enjoy Colleen Hoover's books, great, good for you. I'm happy for you. This is not meant to be me talking shit about people who read Colleen Hoover's books, not talking shit about Colleen Hoover. I talk about her a lot offline, because so many people like will only read Colleen Hoover, and I kind of just gave this whole spiel over Christmas with family members who read Colleen Hoover. But I first and foremost, I just want to say I commend her for getting more people to pick up books. There was a summer of 2022. It was like all of a sudden on my personal Instagram, every story, it was girls I knew from either they're my friends or from high school or college. They were posting that they were reading. And yes, 99.9% of them were reading Colleen Hoover. But it was the first time where it seemed like I was seeing posts about people reading outside of my Bookstagram feed. So I think her getting people to pick up books again is a really great thing, and I applaud her for doing that. It makes our community bigger. Some of you might have gotten back into reading from reading Colleen Hoover, so that will always be a really great thing. My issue is then when people just don't read anything else. And I will say to people in real life, like, oh, if you liked Colleen Hoover, like here are all of these books that are the same vibe, but they're actually better. They're more well written. They're better books. And like, not even if they're better, like if you like that, you would also like this. And there are people who will just not branch out from the Colleen Hoover train. And that's when I kind of just like, I don't need to talk to them anymore. If you're like, you know, when you're at like a party or something and it comes up, I'm just like, okay, like I tried, my job here is done. I have read 3 Colleen Hoover books. The first one I read was Verity, and I loved it. Like everybody did. I was obsessed with it. I couldn't put it down. I read it probably 5 years ago now. Then I read Layla, and that is the paranormal romance. And that one, I was just like, what the fuck is this? Like, it was too weird for me. It was not for me. And then I read It Ends With Us. And I had that reaction that everybody has where I couldn't put it down. But I actually, though, was like, this book is so dumb. And I understand why people like fly through them so fast because they are so, so readable and the plots really do suck you in. But I felt like it was kind of just glorifying trauma, like very much trauma porn, kind of excusing trauma, like domestic violence plays a very big role and It Ends With Us. And the first time the main character waited, like she stuck around a little bit and kind of justified or tried in her head, like she really grappled with the prospect of leaving her partner. And I totally understand that is something that happens in real life. And I know that that book was based on Colleen's parents, but I feel like when you have, you know, you have this audience of most of them are young women, like you should be teaching them that that is not okay from the first time it happens and not making excuses for it. And then the fact that she writes her diary to Ellen DeGeneres, I was like, this is so dumb. And after I read It Ends With Us, I was like, I just need to stop. Like, she is not for me. If she is for you, then good for you. It's just, it's not it for me. And yeah, I always like people will come up to me like who people I know in real life who know that I do all this with book stuff and be like, I love Colleen Hoover. And I'm always like, okay, good for you. But if you like it, whatever, like it's just not my thing. I think that for a long time, I know I was afraid to say that I wasn't into her. And I think other people felt like that too. But I'm now seeing people that started off just reading her, then branch out, be like, okay, yeah, like there are things that I didn't like about that. But those are my Colleen Hoover thoughts. It's probably, I'm sure some of you agree with me, and I'm sure some of you are like, well, fuck that, because I love Colleen Hoover. And if you do, good for you. I honestly kind of wish that I did because there's so many of them. They're so popular. It feels like everyone's reading them so you can have the conversation. But Colleen Hoover is just not for me. With all of that being said, it is time to get into the books. The first one is Private by Kate Bryan. This is a childhood favorite. I just reread it. So if you missed it, one of my 2024 reading goals is something I also did in 2023, and it is to reread a childhood favorite once a month. I'm doing this because it first started with The Outsiders. I wanted to revisit it, and then I just really loved kind of the books hit in a different way, and I've enjoyed all of them that I've reread, but it also reminded me, like kind of placed me back into the mindset that I was in when I first read those books and reminded me kind of it like reconnected me with my younger self in a way that sounds so lame, but it was just like a really fun experience. And that's why I decided to continue this. And when I think about book series that I loved in my past, Private is the number one, like without a freaking doubt. I wasn't into the Harry Potter books as a teenager. Like a lot of my friends were like, Private was my series. And Hunger Games, I was a bit older when it came out, but I wasn't into that. Like Private was it for me, you know? So I started reading the Click books, obviously. Like anyone, I feel like it makes so much sense that I was obsessed with the Click. And then I graduated on to Private. And in so many ways, Private is really the grown up version of those books. So these are obviously YA books, although I just reread the first one, which is the one that I'm going to be telling you about right now. It reads obviously YA, but it reads very similarly to how The Summer I Turned Pretty read. Like you it's like it's a bit more adult. Like they're dealing with like heavier themes, like not I mean, not that YA, I don't know what I'm trying to say, because like YA does deal with heavy themes, but it's not like childish, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So what is this series about? So our main girl is Reed, and we meet her as she is driving onto campus at her new boarding school because she is starting her sophomore year of high school at the like acclaimed, famous, super exclusive boarding school, Easton Academy in Connecticut. She is from rural Pennsylvania. Her dad is driving her in kind of their like beat up Toyota, and they pull on campus and people are in like these glamorous cars. And she talks about like the way that the parents are dressed and the kids are dressed, just like she is very, very much a fish out of water. She is a scholarship student at this school. She is a great athlete. She had straight A's in her high school. She set out to go here because she wanted to set herself up for a better future. You know that there is trouble in her home life. Her mom deals with substance abuse issues, and she just kind of wanted to get out of her small town and set herself up for success in the rest of her life. So she is feeling confident until she gets on campus and really is like struck with how different she is from all of her classmates. And she's like, it's very clear that she's kind of the quote unquote like scholarship kid, right? So she gets to her dorm room, she meets her roommate. She's like not really obsessed with her roommate, but she starts making some friends, and it's like the first night or something in the dorm, and she has like a window seat, and she's sitting at the seat, and she looks across and she can see into a bedroom across in this building called Billings. And Billings, she ends up after this finding out, is like this most exclusive dorm on campus. You have to be invited into it. One of her hallmates is like, oh, I'm a legacy, so I'll get to live there next year. It's kind of like a sorority. Like you have to be initiated into it, you have to be chosen, and you don't just get assigned to live in Billings. It is like a very, everyone who lived in Billings goes on to attend an Ivy League school. There are famous actresses, judges, politicians, like everyone who is in Billings is kind of like, it's special to be there. So she's looking out her window directly into a bedroom in Billings, and she sees a girl sitting there reading, and she's like really struck by this girl. She's like, who is she? She's very like ethereal looking. And then she sees behind the girl that 3 other girls are there, and they're all in these like sexy pajamas, and there's candles lit everywhere. And she kind of is just like, she thought coming to Easton was her fresh start, and she's not really off to it right away. Like she looks at them and she's like, that's what I want to be. I want to be friends with that. I want to have that. And then there's one girl who is like very clearly the ringleader. She's the most beautiful. We find out her name is Noelle. And like I was so obsessed with Noelle to the point that I always said I was going to name my daughter Noelle. But she is like she's kind of like ruthless. Like she's the head bitch in charge, right? And she notices Reed looking in the mirror and looking through the window. So she goes up to the window, they make eye contact, and Noelle smirks and then closes the curtains. And Reed like freaks out. She's so embarrassed that she got caught. And obviously these girls are like very popular at school. The next day she goes into the dining hall and she kind of finds out that they are the most popular girls in school. They sit at the Billings table with the hottest guys. People like stare at them as they walk into the cafeteria. It's very like the plastic showing up for lunch in Mean Girls. And they notice Reed right away. And they recognize her and they kind of take notice of her, and they invite her to sit at their table during lunch. And all of a sudden Reed finds herself on the fast track to kind of being initiated into their group and their friend group. And there is like hazing involved. She meets a guy and starts hanging out with him, and there's like hints of what happens. But if like I feel like if you read these books as a teenager, as a child, the way that I did, I highly recommend doing the reread one book in, and like it is hitting just like it did back then. And it's like it's so funny because it is such a precursor to all of the books that I loved now. I just do want to say quickly before I elaborate on that thought, some things do not age well. Like these books were written in the early 2000s. Some words that they use, insults that they call each other, would just would never be written now. But it is I always find it interesting to see those things, and I'm like, oh my god, like it's very jarring when you see it and like you realize that's a word that you always heard or saw, and like how society has just like eliminated it for the rightfully so, right? So anyway, though, these books are such a precursor to what I love now. Like it's like the Clique is like the childhood version of this, and then Private is your teenage years, and then you would graduate onto like Gossip Girl and Housewives, really. And then there's also though like a thriller element to this. So in the first book, the way that it ends, I won't spoil it, but it's, you start realizing like something more is going on this campus. And then in every single book after, like someone like Reed almost dies in every single book. So it was just really funny for me to see how my reading tastes have evolved now. All of these things that I love reading now. I love reading about socialites and kind of upper echelons of society. And I always say I love reading about rich people behaving badly, and the exclusivity of that type of world, and like aristocracy and royalty and thrillers and murder and all of those things in history. And this is really like, I think, I don't know if my obsession with those, reading about those things, started with this book, but revisiting it made it make so much sense that like young Kayla was so interested and obsessed with this series. And like when I say I was obsessed with this series, like it came to define my the summer before my senior year of high school and the beginning of my senior year of high school. My best friend Megan had already read the first few and she got me to read them. I think there was like 6 at the time. It ends up becoming a 17 book series. There's also a spin-off series that is so good, and I think I might revisit as well. And then it got to the point where Megan and I would just be talking about them all the time. And then the rest of our friend group started reading them. And then every Friday night, we would go to half apps at Applebee's. And that's where like my whole school hung out. And it was like those Friday nights kind of turned into book club because we were just all sitting around talking about them. It was so exciting when a new one came out. There's one book called Ominous. And like I learned what that word meant because that book was coming out, and whenever I use that word I always think of this series. I just loved it so much. I'm so excited to be revisiting it. I'm going to be doing 2 a month since there are 17, so I'm so excited. Like the second I finished that first one, I was ready to dive into the second one, but I think I was going to be reading the second Divine Rivals next, so I was like, I have a priority. But so excited to be revisiting this. I'm so happy that I decided to do it. I think I always kind of said that I wouldn't because I was worried that it wouldn't measure up as high when I wouldn't feel the same way that it did when I originally read them. But experiencing them now as an adult is making me appreciate it in such a different way. And yeah, I gave it 5 stars in my reread. I have tended to do that with most of the books that I've reread because it's kind of just like the experience is like a 5-star reading experience, you know? So that is Private by Kate Bryan. Next up is Serpent and Dove by Shelby Mahurin. This was one of my 23 and 23 books. I owned this book probably since it had come out. I have hardcover editions of all 3 of them, and I just never got around to picking it up. I think I'm starting to read fantasy more frequently, specifically in like the last 6 months, but I used to just do it so sparingly. And I also used to only read fantasy books when the series was complete. So I'm assuming I bought this book when the rest of the series wasn't out. It is a 3-book series, and then a spinoff book did come out recently. So it was one of my 23 and 23. I had to pick it up. And I was so pleasantly surprised by how much I loved it. I had no idea that it was about witches, and I picked it up in, I think, like August or September. So then I know that I did books 2 and 3 in October. It just felt very timely with Halloween. So in this world, we're kind of living in, there's a name for the city or the country. It's called Caesarean, but it reminded me very much of like a revolutionary era France. And I feel like French, maybe you're in France or something. Like I feel like French things were kind of like involved in it, and the main character's name is very French seeming. So anyway, in this world, witches exist, and they are forced to hide because they are being hunted by the church. So it really, like, the church is the ruling party of this world, even though there is a royal family. Like everything kind of goes through the church. They are hunting the witches, as I said. So they are in, when you first start the book, you don't realize how prevalent witches and magic are in this world that we're discovering because they're all in hiding. But when someone uses magic, the magic has a smell, and it smells like similar to cinnamon. So like when the guards smell cinnamon, they know like something is going on. And like most of the time it seems like the witches are just kind of in direct protest with the church. Like they'll stage events or whatever to kind of like get back at the church because they are basically fighting each other, even though it like seems very much so that the church has all of the power and the upper hand. So our main girl is Lou, and she is a witch both in hiding and on the run. We don't know much about her past at first, but we know that she had to escape the situation that she grew up in, and she has been in hiding in the city that I pictured as Paris. And she has friends who I don't, it's so hard to talk about the first book in a series because I don't want to give anything away, but she has friends who know she's a witch. Some of them are also witches or magical things. And they kind of are like a not like a street urchin, but they're just like a little like gang on town, you know, like they help each other out. She ends up sleeping most nights in this like attic, like apartment basically above a theater. And no one knows that she's there. So basically a series of events happens where she is forced into a marriage with one of the church's guards. There's an actual term for it, I just can't think of it. This guy named Reed, and Reed was, he is a church guy, and he is like high up in their like army or whatever, so he is so against magic and witchcraft. He has no idea that Lou is a witch. She is hiding that, and she ends up going along with the marriage because she, like I said in the very beginning, is on the run. So she also needs to be in hiding, and she realizes that the things that are chasing her that she's running from, actually maybe being in with the church will offer her a bit of protection from that. Wink wink. So she marries Reed, and then she's forced to live in this like building. I pictured them living in this giant tower that the church runs. It's where Reed lives with the rest of his soldiers and kind of trains and things like that. She's seeking refuge there, but also hiding who she is, hiding her whole life from him. And obviously they start to fall in love, and I just loved their love story so much. It's enemies to lovers. It is complete opposites attract. Reed grew up in the church. You learn that he was orphaned, so all he knows is the church. He never really lived in the outside world. And Louise, on top of being a witch, is a very liberated, modern, for the time period that this book is set in, woman. And she, like, he is so conservative, she is not. She'll talk freely about sex and like kind of scandalize him. It was like such a fun real, like, it was just so, I was obsessed with them. And it is the first book in a series, so much happens after that. And when I posted that I was reading and loving this book, I heard from a lot of people that it kind of fell off after the first one. I'm glad that I read all three books. This, in the sense of any fantasy series, the first book is really all of the setup and the world building, and then the world completely expands in the second one, and I really enjoyed the way that it did. The third one, I would say I liked the first one the most, then the third one, and then the second one last. I liked the way that the series ended. I liked how it kind of all came together and wrapped up the magic of the world, all the different creatures. Obviously some things bother me, but I don't want to say because of spoilers, but there's so many things going on. It was just such a fun ride. I read them in October. It felt very Halloween adjacent. I don't think you need to wait until October though, but I really loved this. If you've had this sitting on your shelf for a while, I definitely recommend picking it up. If you're looking for a witchy romance with like a bit of fantasy element, I would also recommend picking this one up. I gave the first book 4 stars. I loved it. That is Serpent and Dove by Shelby Mahurin. The final book is Did You Hear About Kitty Karr by Crystal Smith Paul, and this is the first time we're talking about a book that I didn't love, and I was a little nervous at first to do this. Part of why I always talk about books that I loved is because it's so much more fun to like gush and be like I was obsessed and like get so excited about a book rather than being so negative about it. And I also don't want to be like, I don't really feel the need to be like negatively promoting a book, you know, like I'm here to encourage people to read. And I think the best way to do that is through telling you guys about all the books that I love. But I understand there is something to be said about an unpopular opinion, or maybe in this case, I think what I had was a popular opinion. This was a Reese's Book Club pick. It was a book of the month pick. So if you have it or have been thinking about it, I obviously will give you guys my unfiltered raw thoughts. Maybe one day we'll do a unpopular opinion or books I didn't like episode, but I think it's safe to say that I will include them if it is requested in a listener's choice episode. But I usually won't really be picking a book I didn't like, just because it is so much more fun, like I said, to talk about books that I did. So for this one, I want to tell you about the plot first, and then I will get into what I didn't like, and I think I can do it without spoiling. So this is very much a Hollywood story. It is not like Evelyn Hugo at all, but I think if I had to compare this to 2 other books, I would say it's like Evelyn Hugo meets The Vanishing Half, which is just like 2 very different books, but this book is kind of like them 2 together. So in the modern day, we find out that a famous kind of like golden age Hollywood actress, Kitty Karr, has died, and she has left her entire estate to 3 Black sisters, and the world is so confused. So everyone thought that Kitty was a white woman, so they don't understand why she left her entire estate to these sisters who it's known that their families were connected. They grew up the sisters grew up next door to Kitty, so they're family friends, but they're like, everyone is like just really confused by this. And the only reason I point out that they are Black is because race is such a huge, huge part of the story. Also, I'm very aware that I'm a white woman telling you about this book. So I'm just telling you what I thought. My issues with it were really more with like writing things. The plot of it, I actually loved. Like, I thought it was so interesting, so informative, such an important education for someone like me who has never experienced any of the topics that come up in this book, right? So in the present day, Elise is the oldest sister, and she is kind of the one who navigates us through the present day timeline. And it is about the media finding out about Kitty's death and the fact that her and her sisters have inherited her estate, and the media storm that comes with that, and the shock about it. Elise is an actress. Her whole family is in the industry. That part was interesting to read about, and we're reading about them grieving because they were very close with Kitty, and the media, I think it was that like the media didn't really know exactly how close they were with her. And things come to light as the book goes on that kind of explain, or not kind of, that does explain why Kitty left her estate to these women and basically to this family, right? So then it's also told through flashbacks to Kitty's life. And this is what I loved so much. Like, this is where I wish that the whole book was just Kitty's story, like straight through. So we meet Kitty as a light-skinned Black child in growing up in the South, and her mom is a housekeeper for a white family, and we find out that actually her dad is the like man of that family, and she is kind of like, she's treated differently because she's his daughter. So like, she'll go into the house and she'll play with what is her half sister, but then at night, like, she has to go home, and like um the guy's wife will like throw her like, she'll like bake elaborate cakes for her birthday. Like, they kind of like give her preference, because she actually is this guy's daughter. Kitty does not know that though, as she is growing up. So her mom like is darker skinned, and she is the housekeeper, like I said, and her mom will every now and then take her to, I think they lived in North Carolina, and so she'll take her to one of the bigger cities there, and she will tell Kitty to pretend that she is white and to not call her mom and pretend that she is her like nanny, her caregiver. And Kitty, from this very young age, gets to experience the world as a white child versus what she experiences in her day-to-day life as a Black child. So her mom ends up befriending another woman who is actually doing the same thing with her daughter, and they kind of bond over that, and Kitty and this girl's life become entwined for the rest of their lives. And the first thing that leaves my brain when I read a book is the character's name, so I don't remember what that other daughter's name was, but she becomes a huge figure in Kitty's life. So Kitty, she's extremely, extremely beautiful. And when she has a boyfriend, and after high school, they are kind of like planning on getting married, but her mom like really wants her to like go and like live a life. And things happen, and she ends up in Hollywood, where she will be staying with the other little girl who was passing as the children, who she's already been out in Hollywood, been passing as a white woman, living as a white woman, and now Kitty has come to live with her. She learns that this is what her mom wanted for her, and she starts her life in Hollywood as a white woman. And the two of them doing this at the same time was so interesting, because you saw two completely different perspectives of this. Like, Kitty wants a career, and she ends up getting a job in a studio, and she wants to work her way up. She's really interested in that. She's super independent. She wants to make her own money. But the other girl just wants to get married to a white man to kind of solidify that part of her life, and for like the safety and the security that she thinks that it will afford her. So they're on two completely different paths as they're leaving together. It was so interesting, and Kitty ends up finding a community of women who are passing in Hollywood, and you see so many different perspectives of what that is like. You see so many different things that can happen, the danger of it, how they're able to change their lives. Like, it is just so interesting and so fascinating. This book took me a bit to get into. I actually almost DNF'd it. I'm glad that I didn't though, because then it turned a corner, and I couldn't put it down. And I stayed up so late reading it because I was so into Kitty and her story. I loved her as a character. I thought her life was so interesting. It was so fascinating. I feel like I learned so much while I was reading this. The thing that I didn't like was the modern timeline. Like, it just completely fell apart for me. It was nowhere near as good as Kitty's chapters. It felt so disjointed. It felt like it was almost written by another person. I don't think they were even necessary. Like, this book, I would have been so much stronger if it was just Kitty's story. We didn't need to see, like, I guess the modern timelines was serving as a vehicle to show the aftermath of her death. And I can't remember if it ended up becoming public that Kitty actually all this time was a Black woman, but it just didn't work for me. Like, I understand when you learn the truth about the connection between the family who she gives her estate to and Kitty, like, you kind of see why she included that modern timeline, but they could have just been like an epilogue or something. Like, it just really pulled me out of the story, and I was like, okay, I need to get through these chapters quickly because I just wanted to get back to Kitty's story. That is where, like, the heart and, like, the meat of this book is. I loved her story so much. Like, I honestly, if it was just Kitty, I probably would have given it 5 stars, but because of that juxtaposition, I ended up giving this 3 stars. So 3 stars for me. Okay, so my rating scale is 5 stars, obsessed, 5-star feeling. 4 stars, I loved this. 3 is either I liked or I really liked. So for this one, I guess it would be I liked this. 2 stars is didn't like it, but I finished. And 1 star is I hated this and I should have DNF'd it. So I gave this 3 stars, and my 3, I always say, if I give a book 3 stars, like, it's not a bad rating. It means that I liked it. I just didn't love it. Like, you really got to impress me for me to give you a 4 or 5, you know? So yeah, I just, like, I have mixed feelings on it. And when I posted my review, I got so many messages of people saying they felt the exact same way. It seems like the modern day timeline is what kind of ruined it for so many people. I think if everything I told you just now about Kitty's story sounds interesting to you, I would recommend still picking it up because it is worth it for that. Just, like, maybe be prepared to, like, skim through the modern day timeline because it's just not as good. Like I said, I gave that 3 stars, and that is Did You Hear About Kitty Karr by Crystal Smith Paul. It's time for mood reads. This is the segment where you tell me a mood that you're in and I prescribe a book for you. And I actually forgot to post requesting mood reads this week, so I went through all the other times I've posted and pulled from there. So if I don't ever answer your episode on, like, the week I post asking for mood reads, who knows, you might just hear it later on. Our first one comes from Books on the Brain at Bookstagram, and she is in the mood for crying. And for that, I would say While Paris Slept by Ruth Truart. This was one of my And for that, I would say Will Paris Slept by Ruth Truart. This was one of my 23 and 23 books. I don't know if it's a duology. I know she has 2 books. I don't know why I put it off for so long because it's World War II historical fiction. So right away, I'm super intrigued. The first half of this book, like, I just couldn't, it wasn't that great. I think I ended up giving this book 3 stars, but this second half, it is like tore my heart out. I was crying so much. So basically, this book, what happens in this book is this woman was at Auschwitz, or not Auschwitz, she was at a concentration camp though, and she had I think she was first at Drancy, and she had a baby with her. And as she is being loaded onto a car to go to Auschwitz, she sees a railway worker who is not a Nazi. He is the guy whose perspective we're in. So he is a French man, and he's being forced to work on the railroad at, like, the transit camps, right? And he is also like he's not a sympathizer. Like, he's actually, like, sabotaging the trains as he goes because it's like that's his form of resistance. And the woman hands the baby to him because she is like she just knows that she is going somewhere she doesn't want her baby to be, and she thinks she's giving him the best opportunity. So we meet that man years after the war as he is living in California with his wife. We learn their whole story. We see the baby growing up, and then it turns out that the woman survived and her husband did, and they are now looking for their son. And what follows is just like, I don't want to spoil it, but my heart hurt so badly. The ending of this book, I was crying so much. It is just a beautiful story of family and a mother's love and sacrifice and nature versus nurture. And oh my God, I just, like, I don't know why. Maybe I gave it 4 stars because it feels like it was a 4-star read, you know? But that was Will Paris Left by Ruth Truart, and I am excited to pick up the Ruth second book that I also have. Reading Undercovers requested a New York historical fiction, and I'm sure some of you listening right now are assuming I'm going to say Fiona Davis because Fiona Davis is the queen of New York historical fiction. So I guess I am saying Fiona Davis because all of her books are set around a different New York landmark. So there's one about the New York Public Library on Fifth Avenue, and it's like they're always dual timeline, except her last one was one timeline. There's always a mystery element. It's always in two different time periods. It's never been in the modern time. She's done the New York Public Library. She's done the Dakota. Her last one was Radio City, and her next one is the Met, which I'm really excited about. But I actually am going to recommend A Woman of Intelligence by Karen Tannaby. This is a Cold War historical fiction about a woman who's kind of recruited to become a spy. I loved this so much. It feels very New York. There are scenes of her like in Central Park that remind me of The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel when Midge is in the park. And I actually was in Central Park today and I was thinking about this book. So it feels very fitting to recommend that as a New York historical fiction. And the final one comes from The Shelf Around the Corner, and she requests a historical nonfiction for audiobooks. So one of my reading goals for this year is to do one historical nonfiction book a month on audio. I'm going to recommend Capote's Women by Lawrence Leamer. I just finished this one, and it is being turned into a show by Ryan Murphy. It's the next season of Feud, which comes out at the end of January, and I am so excited. So this book is basically Capote had what were called his swans, and they were New York society women. So Lee Radswell, Babe Haley, I can't think of any of the names off the top of my head, but these famous women in society, and Truman befriended all of them. But then he ended up like he was a massive gossip and would kind of like turn them on each other, like was always sharing everybody's stories to each other. And when he actually though ended up betraying them in a major way because he wrote, I don't know if it was a full book, I think it might have just been like a short story about these women. Like he fictionalized their lives, but it was so obvious to anyone reading it who these were about, and he kind of like just really betrayed their trust and all their secrets. And then the swans turned on Truman and ended up shutting him out of society. It is the next season of Feud, so I am so excited about that. The book was told in such an interesting way, so it went through all of the swans and it would kind of go one by one. But then since their lives were so interspersed, you would get like crossovers, like they would just keep popping up later in the book. But at the same time, he told, I obviously said she first because I always read books by women, but this one is by a man. The author told Truman's life story throughout at the same time as you were learning about the swans. It was so interesting. I never really knew much about Truman. I've read Breakfast at Tiffany's and In Cold Blood, but I really enjoyed this. Like I usually don't listen to audiobooks when I'm home at my mom's house, but I was listening to it while I was getting ready. Like I just couldn't stop listening. So good. I think it would also be super readable too. It's not too long. It felt like just reading like a wild story, like reading page 6. Honestly, it was so good. And I can't wait for the show. So that is the one that I would recommend. And that is our show. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure you read the book club pick Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin before the book club episode on February 1st. If you want to submit your thoughts, send them over to Professional Book Girl. Actually, I just had this thought. You could even like type them out in the email and I will read them for you. So you can do that and send them to professionalbookgirlpod@gmail.com or DM them to me on Instagram @professionalbookgirl. Please make sure you're following, subscribe, whatever you guys do on whatever podcast platform you're listening on, and follow me on Instagram @KRedWhat. I will see you next week.